We're back in the virtual classroom once again for week 11 in Comp 3077. This will be our second to last week of a SAM case and a quiz, and then in week 13 you will have a custom project. Those details should be posted in week 13's FOL content. You can go check that out. Most of you probably won't look at it till we get right before it. That'll be worth the same as a case and the quiz, and now we've got our last two sets of cases and quizzes going in before that, and then in week 14 you'll have your test. So just few reminders there. Week 11 is a cool case. This is a case that's all about projections, looking at numbers, looking at financials, and imagining what things would be like if we were at this rate or if we brought in this much in this particular category that week. So lots of what if analysis type of stuff. And we're going to do a solver model, which is some heavy duty statistical math, but with Excel, it handles it for you, which is nice and handy. So one of the first things we're going to do in this case is one of those pre-steps where we're going to adjust some stuff on the menus. I know last week in week 10, we had added an entire tab, the developer tab. So it added a tab into the ribbon, and we had all that stuff to work with as it pertained to macros. This week, we're going to add a menu item to an existing menu in a tab. It'll be on the data tab. That'll be the solver add-in. And we're going to do some advanced charting. We haven't dealt with charts since week 4, and they do come up again on the final test. And I think charts, there's just so much stuff you can learn about them and so many things you can do. And I really like that this case having to do with financial projections went back and revisited some charts and some different chart types as well. We're going to do some scenarios. You guys don't know what that is yet, but it's under the same place as GoalSeek, which we have done in a previous case. So, and that's not really like GoalSeek. That's scenarios is where you can set up different contents for the same group of cells to load in and out, and you'll see when we get to that part. We're going to make a pivot table off some scenarios. We could do a summary report as well, and we're going to do a full solver model, which is some major math, and Excel will handle it for you. So let's get started. I've got everything loaded up here. As always, it's good to check in with FOL content and see what you're covering, kind of what we just talked about in the intro slide deck. Again, reminding you, cases have been worth 4% since week 7. So if you submit the case and you don't get 100%, as always, go back and look at your mistakes, go back to the original file, submit again, and stop skipping your quizzes. I see so many students just not doing the quizzes, despite the fact that the answers are in the training. It's week 11. I shouldn't have to remind you about that. There is a small, very small item at the very end of the instructions that you won't be able to do on a Mac, but the notes are available in the instructions. So I've gone in to SAM already. I've gone into the week 11 case items, and I've already downloaded the stuff, just trying to pick things up a little bit here because I'm going to have a lot of explaining to do in this video about different steps, although I don't think still won't be as long as week 9. So in my downloads, I've got the instructions right here, and I've got the case file here. I'm going to rename it as always. Same thing every time. Oops, I already got the instructions open. Let's get that renamed before we open it. Last week, I get so used to you guys remembering that I didn't even show it to you in the video, but I do like to make sure I show it. So we've got the instructions up here, and we've got that one pre-step where we're going to add something into a menu, and then we've got 14 steps total. And at the very end there, you'll see they do make some Mac comments in here. These newer cases that we're using in SAM now, they do go out of their way to try and make sure Mac users are aware of things being a bit different. So this first thing we're going to do is another example of that. And they do explain to you that you're going to be going into tools to put your ad in on. And I won't be demoing that exact process in the video because I don't have a Mac, but I'm just pointing out that you should look out for that. Most of you are on PCs. Not going to get into the Mac and PC argument, even though I do like Macs for a lot of reasons, and I like PCs for a lot of reasons. I went ahead and preemptively jumped to the first worksheet after documentation. That's fine, or you can be on the documentation sheet. It really doesn't matter where you are when you go and do this. Just like last week, on your PC, you can go into File Options, to get to the Excel options window, or you can click on the quick access drop down button, the arrow there, and you can go into more commands, and it will also open up the Excel options window. And from the Excel options window, however you choose to go in there, you're going to click add-ins. And then this upper part just explains what add-ins are running and what's going on. Kind of a current status report. If you want to add more, you go down here where it says Manage Excel Add-ins. You click the Go button, and you have the solver add-in. Now, I'm going to shut mine off because I already had it on as I was already practicing this case. One thing I want to make you aware of is in the Developer tab. Oh, it's still there. Weird. Interesting. There. It's gone now. So this is going to show up in the Data tab. As I explained to you guys at the beginning of the case, last week we added an entire tab, and it had its own menu on the ribbon. This week we're adding a menu item to part of the ribbon in one of the tabs. So over at the very right-hand side here, and again, as usual, I have quite a wide monitor, so my menu might look a little bit different than yours. Yours might be more consolidated. If I keep squeezing it and squeezing it, eventually you'll see, yeah, forecast still keeps those two items separate, which is nice. You're going to need to go in there quite a bit today. And you're also going to need to go to the very end of your menu. And that is where, if you do what I asked you to do at the beginning, which is going in here, going to add-ins, down here, add-ins, go, and you check off the solver add-in. When I click OK now with the Data tab visible, you will see the solver menu item arrive on the ribbon eventually. And then I will be using that in step, I think it's step 12 or 13. I'm pretty sure it's step 12. Actually, it's 11. Step 11. So make sure that you do that at the beginning of the case, and then when you get to step 11, you won't have to go back and worry about doing that. So that just accomplished what we were to do here before we started the instructions. This right here, we've already renamed the file. So let's get started. Dwayne, that's an interesting spelling of the name Dwayne. I've met a few Dwaynes. I've never seen that before. He works for the Cairo Consulting Company in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm not sure what kind of consulting they do, but you will see in their numbers they do charge quite a bit of money per hour, which is kind of cool. So he's been asked to analyze the data to see where they could make the most profit, what the best mix would be in terms of who they're using and how they're going to deliver this consulting service. So the first thing you're going to do is something called a one variable data table. This is pretty cool. And before you set that up, you're going to enter some data first in cells D5, E5, F5, G5. So these steps A through D are literally just pointing to a cell. I think we did this in week 3. This is the simplest function you can have. It starts with an equals, and you're simply calling up a cell. That's it. You can type it out. You can click on the cell. Doesn't need to be absolute because you're not scrolling anywhere. So we're going to jump back to the management worksheet, and we're going to go through these first 4. So the first one is equals B4. And you can see B4 are the hours sold in this particular, I don't know if this is a quarter or a year or how much time has gone by here. Maybe it's just a month. And you're going to put that piece of data into there. In the next cell, you're going to make a reference to B19. You can just type these in, or you can click on the cell. In the next cell, you're going to make a reference to B20. So you can also go down and click on there. You know, I know we're in week 11, but I still love reviewing with you guys the stuff we've learned since week 1. And this one is B21. So you're going to want to make sure you have those references correct, because what's going to happen here is we have some important figures that we've pulled from the financial table over here, and we're going to project out how things would look based on these sales if we kept moving forward with that same momentum. And we're going to have Excel actually piece all that together for us. So instead of doing this with a bunch of functions, we can actually highlight this range, and I'm following through with the instructions as shown here. D5 to G10, and we can tell Excel to fill in the table for us based on the primary variable of the hours sold. And this will be done from the data tab, which I'm already on because I went there to confirm I got the solver add-in. And it will be done from here, the same place where we did GoalSeek. So in a similar fashion to what GoalSeek does, which is just basically saying, hey, you know, I got this much money last quarter. How many people would I have needed to participate in my class to get this much money? So you would have a cell that you would change and then a cell that you would set to a certain amount, which would be the this much that I'm looking for. So GoalSeek is a very simple what-if analysis that is doing statistical math to project out what you'd need to do in certain areas. The data table tool does something similar, but based on a variable that will filter through more data. So if we go in here, this is going through columns of data. So they make it very clear here. You want to use B4 as the column input cell. And back. So B4 is over here. And we're going to go to column input cell and put B4, and then we're just going to click OK. So watch what happens here when I click OK. So this, I'm probably explaining this even more than I need to, but I just want to make sure you understand what it's actually doing, because the process of getting it done is quite simple. Click OK. And what's going on here is that the table, this you'll see in the formula bar, if you click on the cells, there are table-based functions in here that are all operating off B4. And the rest of it was just data. So if I were to say, okay, well, this time around we sold 8,700 hours, and I put that in, the entire table updates with that. Now that's not part of the step, so I'm going to undo that because I don't want to get that wrong. But it's a pretty cool tool in the way that it does that. And you can also have multiple variables. You can have a 2-variable data table. So that's what we're going to do in the next step. So moving on to step 2, we're going to highlight the range D14 to K19. D14 over to K, down to 19. And they've already put all the references in here for you. This is B21, and then they have their actual hourly data there. So if you operate within this range and go to the same tool under what if analysis in the data tab, data table, this time we're going to have a column input cell, which again is B4. And we're also going to have a row input cell, which is B5. So we're going to bring in another variable, and that's the one going across in a row above, which is the hourly rate charged. Okay, and B5 is the base rate. So B5, if you look at that, it's 310. And you click OK, and this is what we get. And if you were to go to the root cell for one of the variables and change it to 280, for example, it would change the data with it. So it's almost like doing a bunch of functions at once in a table by using this tool, and it just gets it all done at the same time. So here, just to give you a better handle on what this is actually doing, and I mean, there's lots of explanations out there, but I don't mind the help menu at all from Microsoft. 2-variable data table can show you different combinations of interest rates and loan terms, like if you're doing financial stuff, and it will set it all up in the same area. And typically when you have that, you're trying to project out like how much more or less something might cost based on a rate, where a 1-variable data table contains input values either in a single column or across a single row. And any formula in a 1-variable data table must refer to that one input cell. And the whole idea of what it's doing is it's just giving you different examples or different projections of numbers based on the same input. Here's another Excel user. I kind of like this explanation as well, because I had mentioned it's similar to just doing functions and pulling them through a table. The difference is with a single or double variable data table, you can change all of the stuff in one place by changing that one input. So it provides these projections without having to create a bunch of different functions. So it's a really neat tool. And we're going to do something else kind of cool now as well. So let's see. Yeah, I'm doing fine. The way this table is set up, we want to identify what the main variable is there in the corner with a word, but we don't want the number to change, and we want the number to still be able to change if it's changed in B21, which that's what this is. It's a reference to B21. So I talked about this way back at the beginning of the course when I was going on and on about number formats, about how, you choose accounting and then you take off a couple decimal places and it changes to custom. And there's all these different formats you can choose here, but because you're allowed to customize number formats, if you don't see what you want as a go-to option and you don't see it on the shortcut bar in the shortcut menu area here, always use the expand arrow to pull up the original dialog box, and you'll be able to see a lot more options here. So what they want you to do here is use a custom number format. So it's still technically a format for a number or a number to be in a cell, but you can customize it in a way. I don't know if anybody ever scrolls down to the bottom here to see what's down there. You could see near the bottom, you'll see some text in quotes. So what this allows you to do is still leave the contents of the cell, be it a numerical figure or a numerical figure that is a result of a function, which is what this is here. And over top of it, you can put words. So it's not conditional formatting or something like that. It's actually a custom format just for that cell. And these are the words it's suggesting, and it's pulling that from the file somewhere, but that's actually not what that is. It's pulling it from up there, but the Excel, the SAM instructions, tell you what they want you to use, which is hours/price. So hours/price. So inside the quotes, and if you accidentally write over them, you can just type the quotes in. Hours/price, end quote. So I'm going to click OK. And so I chose the text version of it, and then I customized the type. I click OK, and that's what shows up in there. Now, keep in mind, this is a reference to cell B21. If I were to go to B21 just as a test, this is not part of your instructions, and change that to 150, it's still going to change, and it's still going to affect the tables. I'm going to undo that. But this custom format is there as just a more informative way. It's almost like an alternative way to name a cell. And I think it's a pretty cool tool, and I had kind of foreshadowed earlier in the semester that we were going to do a custom format at one point, and now we just did. And that was the end of step 2. So that's it for that worksheet. Go back to your file, give it a nice save, Control S, and then we're going to switch to the change worksheet. And we're going to create a chart. Charts, we did these in week 4. We can do that no problem. D4 to F14 is going to make a chart for you. So we're going to go to the change worksheet. And in the change worksheet, we are going to make a chart according to these instructions. So create a scatter with straight lines chart based on the range D4 to F14 in the data table organizational chart break-even analysis, which is this table right here. And we're going D4. So D4 over to F down to 14. When I was practicing this over the weekend, so the video comes out a little better in my classes. I always kind of look through these beforehand. I had accidentally gone all the way to G, and it just reminded me to remind you guys that, and I'm not going to do that this time. Well, I guess I could no, I don't need to, but some people watch these without audio, so I don't want them to think I'm doing the wrong range. It's D4 to F14. And then you go to the Insert tab, and you pick your chart. Now, after you make your chart, if you happen to have picked up some extra data like that, it's very easy to fix. I'll just show you that as a reminder. So I typically always go to recommended charts to see if it picks up the right chart. I don't see it here, so I'm going to cancel out of that. There is a specific category here for scatter charts. That's the one right here, not pies, obviously. And the type of scatter chart we want is this option right here. Scatter with straight lines. So I'm going to choose that chart. Now, as usual, we've known this for weeks and weeks and weeks now. Whenever we insert objects like this in Excel and we're sitting on them, we get these neat little custom menus that are just for those objects. When we click off them, we lose the menus. This is true with the picture, a chart, a table, all these different things. So make sure you're on there. And if you did by any chance pick up the wrong data like I did by mistake over the weekend, you just go to select data, and I had gone all the way over to G by accident, which I'm guessing a lot of you might do because it just feels like the right thing to do, but you got to pay attention to the instructions. You don't need the gross profit. You're just doing total sales and total expenses. All you had to do is change the G, I had it like that, to an F. So hopefully people aren't watching this without audio and getting confused. I'm just showing you an example of how versatile the chart is even after you create it. And of course, the very first thing you're going to do, as is the case with many objects that you're placing over top of a worksheet, is you're going to resize and reposition it. D15 left corner, H32 right corner. So D15, and then I'm in H. I'm going to go over a little farther. I can be in there to a degree, and then down to 32. And I'm always eyeballing it, so I like to click on the row number to highlight it across to make sure that I'm in the right space, which I am. And the key here with SAM not to be marked off for the placement of the object is to make sure that the edges of the object itself, the lines around the object, are never touching the grid lines of the cell it's said to place it in. Now, this is contrary to what you see if you scroll down in a lot of these instructions, and I know we had some of this going on last week in the week 10 case too, and this is why I always point these out in the videos. This looks really neat and tidy, and I actually prefer the way they have that placed there. But 99% of the time, if you go right to the grid lines, SAM will mark it wrong. So this figure that shows you the proper way that they've submitted for, I guess, the publishers of the case would not likely be marked correct, because the second you're even touching the grid line, the SAM system, when it goes to mark it, thinks you're over the grid line and it marks it wrong. That's why when you see these pictures, when you have these situations, and I'm telling you this now way before the final test too, because this stuff comes up a lot, always do what you were taught by your professors, which is the same as I'm teaching you in the video too, which is to make sure when you're asked to place an object within two cells, left corner, right corner, it's in those cells without touching the grid lines. And I know it would look better if it was a little more stretched out and right into the corner and touching it, but that's just the way you need to do it to get it correct with SAM. So I brought this up a lot. I'm just, you know, it's been since week 4 since you did charts, and they're going to be on the final test. So I'm just reminding you guys. Next step, you're going to get rid of that title. Usually we're dealing with the titles and adding titles. We are still going to do that, just not the main title. So it says remove the title from the chart. Now there are 2 ways to do it. You can go to the design tab and all your chart elements are here, and you go to chart title and just set it to none. Or you can click right on the text box, not in the text box, but on the object itself, and just hit delete. And both versions of removing the title accomplish the same thing. And the chart area and the plot area spread out in the same way, and SAM will mark either one of those methods correct. Next, you are going to reposition the chart legend to the right of the chart. Oops, how did I get down there? No, that's weird. I was way ahead of myself because I had scrolled down to show you the pictures. It just so happens you have to do another chart in step 8, and the second part of it was to remove the chart title. So I was a little ahead of myself there, but that was also the second part of step 4, was to remove the chart title. So we created the chart in step 3, we positioned it, now we've removed the title. Now we're going to add horizontal and vertical axis titles. So I'm going to copy the first little chunk of text there. I might as well preemptively copy it. And then when I get over here, I'm going to turn the titles on by going to my design tab sitting on the chart, axis titles. I'm going to turn them both on. Doesn't matter what order you do it in. Might as well get them both on now, and then do the content itself. And as usual, when you have a text box, and now again, all kinds of stuff I'm always reminding you guys about. SAM did not specify that you had to have a certain format, which means it's only going to be checking for the content, which means the fact that I brought this in there and pasted it and it took the bold formatting from the Word file, I don't have to go and match destination formatting. I can just click outside the box and I'm done. It will not be marked wrong. It's only going to check for formatting if it told you to do certain formatting. And then the next one, which is hours. I can type that one in. Hours contracted. And so in addition to reminding you that unless it says to do formatting, you don't have to worry about the formatting when you're in text boxes. The other thing I was going to remind you about is what do you do every time you're done inputting the data, the words, the letters into a text box that you need in there? You click outside the box. You do not do any more than that. I know this is a contradiction to what I've been teaching you since week 1 about what you do every time you finish a function in a cell, which is that you hit enter. But when you're in a text box, you don't want to start adding hard enters and adding extra characters to those fields, to those spaces, because Sam might mark you wrong for that. So as soon as you're done getting in there, what you need in there, you click outside the box and you move on to the next thing. So now, as you can see, this is definitely, scatterline charts are kind of cool. They run the lines against each other as they're going up and down. But the settings that Excel generally picks, they'll pick from 0 and then they'll go a little bit above the highest number. And a lot of times you have numbers that start way higher than 0. And as you learned in week 4, you can fix this. And the first thing you're going to do if you're modifying a specific axis is click on the axis and right click and go to Format Axis to get into those options. Another reminder, Excel doesn't like to see 7 digits in a 7-digit number, so they immediately revert to scientific numbers, which 2.0E6 is just 2 million. It's just indicating to you the zeros that come after that. You're changing the minimum bounds to 1 million. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, enter. And you see that's 1.0E6. That's the scientific version of a million. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with your computer. That's what it's supposed to do. We knew this in week 4. Maximum bounds will remain or leave them at 2 million. So you don't have to do anything to those. And when you go to right click and go to axis options, it should bring up this right away. So it always brings the axis options up, and you can explore the other chart options from that same menu over here, the side menu. But we are going to stick with the axis options because one of the other things we have to do is change the number format. And it is the number format of that same axis. So you can collapse the axis options part and go to number, but your screen's probably big enough that you would have seen number down there anyway. So you go to the number format. It says category, not format, but that's the same thing. You're going to go to currency, and it says currency 0 decimals. Because this data was pulled from a table where there already were no decimals, it already was no decimals. So all you had to do is change it to currency, and then you're done with part B. For part C, you're going to be altering the bounds on the horizontal axis. So now, click on the horizontal axis, right-click, Format Axis, same thing. We're going to change the minimum to 3,000 because look, nothing starts before 3,000. The same way nothing started before a million, which is why we moved that. So all of a sudden, after making all these changes, enter, and then you'll see the automatic ran that down a little bit to kind of, make the chart a bit more compact, but it still didn't run it to where it ends. And when you have a scatterline chart, you don't need extra space there. You can go right to the end. So this might as well be 5,000. Enter. And now you can see we filled up the entire space of the chart. And that's kind of the goal there. So as we look at this now, it's a lot. The cool thing about scatterline charts is you can see the intersections of lines very well because they're always straight like that. And it's kind of nice to see that, after we got, up above about 1.25 million, we were bringing in more money than we were spending, which is cool. Visual examples are always better in meetings sometimes than just showing numbers. So especially when you have a chart that wasn't using the white space of the plot area like it needed to, and we just fixed all of that by going through everything in steps 4 and 5. Now we're going to learn something new here. It's called scenarios. Scenarios can be found under the same place as GoalSeek and the same place that we just found data tables. Notice I can't click on them because I'm still on the chart. You can't build stuff like that into the chart. So click off the chart. You could be sitting anywhere to do this. And we're focusing on two particular cells, B11 and B14. So B11 has the variable cost per hour, which can vary, hence the fact that it's variable, and the total fixed cost, which is in B14. So the hourly costs can vary, and there'll typically be a total fixed cost on a consulting project that's about that much. Now, what you can do is, because you're going to have different projects and different types of consultants that can charge more money. And what we have here are two other scenarios we'd like to have available to show people, maybe in a meeting or something. One of them has the cost per hour at $3.80 and the total fixed cost is still the same. And the other one has the cost per hour at $3.20 and the total fixed cost is $3.35. What the heck's going on there? Well, those are the certified consultants. And the certified consultants are pretty freaking good at their job, so they can get things done a lot more efficiently. So even though they charge more per hour, their total cost for a project is actually less, which is kind of cool. So we have these two cells there with something in them already, B11 and B14. What you can do is you can go into the Scenario Manager, Data tab, What If Analysis Scenario Manager, and you can create different versions of content for cells in a worksheet that you can load in whenever you feel like it. The first one we're going to call Standard. And what we're doing is a scenario for the contents of two different cells that are non-adjacent. So oftentimes when you're doing scenarios, you can go here and you can highlight a group of cells and you'll have the colon in between, and that's fine. That's not what we're going to do here. We want to change B11 and B14, and that's it. And they're not adjacent, so you simply put a comma in between, no space, B11, comma, B14. And when you click OK, it will give you the option to have a different number for those particular cells. Now, wait a minute, Mike. Why doesn't it say B11 and B14 here? I'm going to cancel out and show you. Because when you have financial workbooks like this, good Excel users will very often name a lot of the figures for what they are. And if you go to B11, you can see B11 is called variable, whatever. It's hard to pull it up in the name box, but and if you, here, we can pull it up by referring to it. Variable cost per hour underscores. So it's named appropriately. And so is B14, as you can see. So when I go in to create the first scenario, which we're calling Standard, and I canceled out of it last time. That's what. So you go in, we're doing, and it's always going to put in the cell you're sitting in, which could be anywhere. It doesn't matter. You can type in what you want there or highlight it. We're not going to highlight. Well, I could have highlighted it too. I could have just clicked on B11, and then I click the Control key, and I click on B14. And then it makes it absolute as I'm doing it. Anything you do like this is made absolute as soon as you create it anyway. So either one of the ways I did it there is fine. You just have to make sure the two cells are separated by a comma because you're only doing those two cells. You're not doing everything in between. Prevent changes box can be checked. They didn't say to change any of that. And this first scenario, which is called Standard, is going to have 380 for the variable cost per hour and 380,000 for the total fixed. So 380,000 was already the total fixed. And we're going to make the variable cost per hour 380. And then we're going to add another one that we can switch back and forth. And this one is going to be called Certified. Certified. Make sure you spell that right. If you have a typo in the name of the scenario, Sam won't be able to see the scenario and they'll mark it wrong. And by default, because I just used those two cells, it already knew. Actually, I still had them highlighted. That's probably why it's doing that. And either or, it's just knew what to do. I like how every new version of Excel gets a little bit smarter about predicting what you want to do. And this is going to be $4.20 per hour, but only $3.35 for the total fixed cost. And now that we've created these, we are going to. This was just an exercise in making the scenarios. You actually don't have to go and turn them on. And this is one of the steps in this particular case that I didn't love because as a best practice, and I do this, I've made scenarios before in real estate rental valuations where I'm trying to project out numbers, and I'll have like a bad weather scenario and a good weather scenario for rental in Grand Bend because it's very weather dependent. It's actually a really good example. I almost forgot I used scenarios for that. And then I have like a normal season scenario where it's like, this is like the average of the whole market and what people would usually get. So when I do it that way, the numbers I originally put in to the cells as data would have been the normal season numbers. And if I make these other scenarios and I go, for example, to show the certified scenario and I click show, it's now overwritten what was in those two cells. And if I close that up and I go to these cells, you can see nothing has changed about the way, like if I start doing a bunch of other stuff, I'm not going to be able to undo that. That's why I always think it's a best practice when you're creating scenarios. If you want to keep the numbers you originally had in there, you can make a scenario right off the top, either called original or standard or I would say average season. I would have called it average or something like that for what, and then I could make two more scenarios for bad weather and epic weather, and I could load any three of them up at any time. If I just make the two new scenarios and forget to save the data in the original scenario, I might forget what it was if I load the other scenario up, and then I'll have to undo to get back to it, which you can easily do. That's all I had to do was click undo, because they did not have us save the 265-380 as a scenario here. And this was also just an exercise in making the scenarios. They didn't actually have you run them, or show them, I should say. That's the proper terminology. So all you have to do is make them. And if they're both there and they're both spelled right, and you go into them and they both have the right numbers in the two cells, then you're good to go. And you don't have to do anything further. You don't click show. I was just showing you some examples. And for the people that watch the video without audio, that probably just screwed you right up. But I taught you at the beginning to use closed captions as well, so you should be doing that. Switch to the process worksheet. So save your file again. We're on to another worksheet. And in the process worksheet, we are going to make another straight line chart. Cool. Scatter chart straight line. D6 to I-14. So this is an interesting situation because D6 to I-14 is going like this, and what you have up in the top here, this is another single variable data table, or actually this is a two variable data table, I think. It is. You can see because there's two variables. You don't want to have what's in here show up in the chart. So you want to make the chart with the data, and then you'd have to hit the control key and highlight across here, which is a way that could accomplish what they want to do. Because what they want to do in the end here, if you go ahead in the instructions a little bit, my science teacher in grade 7 taught me, always read all the directions before you start the process of doing something. It's a really, really good practice to get into. I don't know if you'd want to do that on the final test. It might waste 10 minutes, but she gave us this exercise where she had repeated like 10 times in class that day. Hey, make sure every time you're doing something scientific or something sort of it's part of a process and involves a lot of steps, always sit down and read the directions first. And the final instruction was, now don't do anything and ignore all the previous instructions. There were only 2 people in the whole class that actually got it right. Anyway, so I'm just saying, if you go ahead a little bit here, you're going to see in step 10, you're actually having to name the series. And that's because all these columns full of data that you're highlighting don't have headers on top of them. And it's because this left column in a variable data table is not something you'd include in a chart, which means you have to do the control, which would have worked too. But let's do it the way they said to do it, which is just to highlight this data. Okay, so D15 to I32. D15, that's where you're going to place the chart, sorry. D6 to I14. D6 to I14. Go to Insert, same style as last time, so we know where to go, right here. First thing we're going to have to do, just like last time, drag, reposition. I'm not going to have to go over that so much this time because I'm not reviewing the positioning of the chart. I32, so we got it in D15. We're going over to I and down to 32. Don't be touching the grid lines. Check and make sure we're good to go. We are also removing the title. Same as last time. I'm just going to click on the box. It's quicker. Delete the title. We are also adding horizontal and vertical axis titles. But before we do that, I don't want to fly past step C there. Reposition the chart legend to the right. And that is definitely going to clean things up a bit here. So if you click on the legend, or you don't really have to do it that way, just go to Design, Chart Element, Legend, Right. Okay, that's done. Now, I know this looks a little bit wonky, but don't worry, because we're about to fix all that stuff as we keep going through the steps. Okay, so net income is the first title. That's your vertical. Hours contracted will be your horizontal. So go in here, turn them on just like last time. You can turn them both on, doesn't matter what order. Go into the text, paste it in, hours contracted. We can copy that. Oh, we can just type it. I mean, that's the same. Here, I'm just going to type it. That's actually the same axis title as the horizontal as the other chart. Click outside the box when you're done, both times, obviously. And that time I did the same thing. I pasted the first one, I typed the second one, whatever. Just make sure you click outside the box when you're done and not add extra enters. Change the colors of the chart. Doesn't say the theme, the colors. So sitting on the chart, of course, you have your chart tabs. And there are some cool looking themes here for sure, but change colors is over here. And there are two categories of colors in the current theme of this workbook, colorful and monochromatic, and they've instructed you to choose the first option in monochromatic, and that will change your 5 lines to different shades of blue. And now we're going to fix the way things are all kind of messy here. You notice the horizontal axis is like in the plot area, and that's because the lines do go below 0 and the intersection is not in the right place, and we're going to fix all that. This is pretty cool. So first axis we're going to start with is the vertical. Click on the vertical axis, right click. I know I'm going through the chart stuff a little more quickly than I covered the first couple steps and then scenarios. That's because this is technically review for you guys from week 4. Minimum bounds are going to be 100,000. Maximum, we're going to change to 650. You can actually just change the second digit, and then you'll be at 650. See, this is starting to straighten out now. We're using the vertical space a lot more effectively. Set the horizontal axis to cross at the axis value. Now notice how it hasn't said to switch axes. Horizontal axis crosses where? So it's set to automatic right now, and it's obviously not getting it in the right spot. If you make it go to negative 100,000, as that is where you just set your minimum bounds, then the horizontal axis drops down below the plot area where it should be. Pretty cool, eh? So, and you can play around with these settings and use the space however best you see fit. We're going to do the number format here again. Same thing as the last chart. Go down to number, change it to currency, 0 decimals. Now remember with the last chart, it was already set to 0 decimals. Now it's not. Oh, why do they do this to us? They're not. It's just a matter of where the data was extracted from. It came from this table here where there were 2 decimals. On the previous page, it came from a table where there weren't. So when we go back in here, we are going to go to currency and we're going to set it to 0, which we didn't have to do the first time around, but that's only because it came through with 0. Moving on. Let's go to the horizontal axis now and change those bounds so we can fill in the space going across. So click on the horizontal axis, right click, format axis. Minimum is going to be 3,500. Max is going to be 7,500. Not 1,000, jeez. And look at that. That's a heck of a lot cleaner and better looking than it was a minute ago. As we're using it's not that hard to get the hang of using the plot area better. You you can play around with the numbers a bit, but you don't have to do that. It's really obvious because it's based on where the data is coming in. Now, I'm noticing as I was going on about at the beginning when I was highlighting the data for this chart, I don't have any indications of what these series are. When I know when I'm looking up at the graph that these are the ones charged at $270 an hour. These are 280, these are 290, these are 300. So one would think you could fix this by clicking here and playing around with it. You don't mess around with that. Just go into select data, and each of the series you can set to be based, the name of the series to be based on a cell. So I'm going to actually, here, I'm going to X that out. I'm going to move us into a range so we can see what we're doing. So select data, and for series 1, which is right here, we want that to be named that. So you click on series 1, you click edit, and for series name, which is blank right now, that we didn't get a series name, you just pick up that cell. And you see it says which worksheet it's on. That's a worksheet reference that we learned when we were doing 3D references. Click OK, and you're done with that one. You can't do, well, there might be a way to do them all at once. I don't mess around with that too much. I think it's easier just to, but you can't go for the series for all of them and go in and edit and then highlight all through it. It'll just put all those on the one series. You're individually doing each of these. And that's why I like the way the instructions actually individually assigned you to do each of them instead of telling you to do it all at once. That is the best way to do it. I don't think there is a way to do it all at once. I sworn I saw somebody do it that way once, but this way is better. You're never going to have like hundreds of headings in a chart. You pick up that. And then you pick up that. Now, how did I know which ones to pick up? Because they said, Series 1, use E5. Series 2, use F5. I mean, I was doing it without looking, though, because I can see, as I'm doing it, that this column has that on top of it. So that's the one I pick up. And the last column had 310 on top of it. So that's what I picked up. And once I finish, you could have seen it populating as I was doing it. Now, instead of just having Series 1, which isn't very informative, you actually have the hourly rate for that column. 270, 280, 290. Good stuff. And we didn't have to do stuff like that in week 4, so I'm glad that we threw that in there in this case. Now, time to do a solver. So I want you to save your file. Okay, get back in here, save. Get to the next worksheet. Number 1. Go to the data tab and make sure that at the end of your data tab, you see solver. If you don't see it, you need to go back to the beginning of the video where I instruct you how to add that to the data tab based on these instructions right here. So once that's in there, you will click on solver to get started. But what you need to do here is you need to really follow along with me. Pause the video, make sure everything looks like it should, and I'll be giving you tips along the way if you do have to fix things. But you don't need to be in any of these cells. You don't mess with the data. You could be sitting anywhere you want. And you go to Solver from the Data tab. First thing you're going to do is set the objective cell. So the objective cell is typically the cell that you're going to go and change, or that you want to be at a certain level. That's the objective cell. And in this particular case, it's E10, which are the total, E10. Yeah, which are the total costs. Yes, that's exactly right. So you're going to set E10. And you can also put total costs in there. I think if it has the proper cell name, I don't know if that's named. I would just put the cell in there. And they're costs, so you're not trying to maximize them. So this is set to be a minimum solver. You're trying to keep that as low as you can. So this is kind of common sense here, the way we're doing this. And we're going to try and get that as low as we can by altering these cells. Not to E4. If you do E4, you're still going to end up getting the same answers from the solver in these cells here because it won't actually use E4, but the cell reference will make Sam mark it wrong on you. So you got to make sure everything in here is really precise. And you can go back and fix it if you need to. So those 3 things are all set, which was parts A and B. And now we're going to add these constraints. So this is the way a solver works. And a solver is meant to, again, it's a projection tool. It's statistical math. You're trying to get a number. This to me is like a goal seek with a bunch of variables in it. So you're trying to get a cell and set it to a certain amount or make sure it's equal to or lower than that amount by changing not just one thing. So with a goal seek, you're going to set a cell to a certain amount by changing another cell. With a solver, you're going to set a cell to be in a certain range. It doesn't have to be precise. It can be less than, equal to, greater than, by changing a bunch of stuff. So there can be a bunch of variables involved. And you see this a lot with, I have used solver once, and it was for the same reason. It had to do with rentals, but it had to do with a special event. So there was all these attendance scenarios about if we pre-purchased a bunch of rental. All right, fine, I'll admit it. It was for someone's wedding. I'm a total Excel nerd. I was trying to figure out if we pre-purchased stuff and told the hotel, hey, we'll buy all these rooms from you ahead of time and then rent them ourselves, we could make a profit. I used to have a lot of schemes on the go. So I used a solver model to figure out if it was going to work, and we were going to have to charge people. I don't know. We figured they would have caught us doing, well, whatever. It's our wedding. It wasn't my wedding. It was somebody else's. But yeah, we were just going to book out a hotel and then re-rent the rooms. So anyway, back to what we're doing here. This is a little different. This is just trying to maximize minimize, but maximize cost savings, I guess. So minimize your total costs by keeping track of what the hours are provided by the process pros, the consulting, and then this particular person, Team Mahan. So we need to add our variables and our constraints. Okay, so these constraints are very specific. You click add and you go E4, and then you use this little drop down here and you can choose the equality signs. You can choose whether it's an integer, whether it's a differential or diff. I think that actually stands for something else. It's actually binary, integer, binary. I know that's binary. All different. I think it's different style so that you could have different types of data in the cell. We will do one like that. Anyway, for right now, we're just doing equals. E4 has got to be 5,500. Okay, so that's the total hours. So it's going to stick at 5,500. Now, if you click OK, that's fine. Even though you've only done the one, you can just click add to keep adding more. And the next one is E10 is less than or equal to 1,350,000. So E10 is less than or equal, which is the default one at the top of your options, 1,350,000. And from that point, you don't have to keep clicking OK and going back to add. If you know you have more, you can just keep clicking add. B4 to D4, so a range, which is fine. I can even highlight that. I don't have to keep typing it in. So B4 over to D4, which is the range we used as the changing cell range too. They are going to be less than or equal to 5,000. And then we got one more. And that is that B4 to D4, the same range again, should be an integer, which is like a whole number. So we choose int, and then it automatically populates integer there. And then you can click OK, and you've got your 4 constraints. If you click add again by accident, you could just cancel, and it'll take you back here. So they will not be in the order that you input them, because I think it lists them in cells and alphabetical. And you just need to check and make sure that those are correct. So the 4 of these I'm looking for, that equals 5,000 less than or equal to 1,350,000, E10. That was E10 for sure, right? So just go back and check them. And then the same range twice, less than or equal to 5,000, and has to be an integer. And that is correct. So everything is all set to go. You don't have to do anything here. That would only be if the math got you into negative numbers and you didn't want them to be negative. There's no requirement for that here. So then there's some other stuff down here, like, so this is interesting. I don't want to turn this into a math class, and I will provide a little bit of information on this here. So solver models are fairly complicated math in the background. The cool thing about knowing how to use Excel is if you basically know what you want to do and you have a goal in terms of a number to be at a certain level, and you can start adding in constraints that, as long as they make sense and they work within the parameters of what's happening, you can do your own solver model. And then you get down to here and it's like, what does this stuff mean? So what you have here is a situation where the constraints are non-linear. They're kind of all over the place. So the idea behind a linear solver problem is that each constraint can be solved, and then you move on to the next one, and it's literally linear. It's like a smooth transition. It's a smooth track. It goes from one end to the other. We have a situation here where it's nonlinear because you can have constraints sort of bouncing around in all different directions to get to the lowest cost we can. And then there's an option for evolutionary, where it's like once it solves one model, then it goes to the next and tries to keep. So you could teach a whole course on solver in Excel, literally, and we're just touching upon it here in this one case, and it will be on your final test, and it's not any more complicated than the version we have here. It's a pretty simple example, and your settings are going to be very similar. So you're not going to have to worry about changing this around. You just leave it. And I just wanted to at least explain what this is. So I know I'm taking a lot of time here, and I'm hoping you're not going ahead and just clicking all kinds of stuff. So the next thing we're going to do is run the solver, keep the solution, then return to the dialog box and save the model into these cells. What a bunch of my students did in the lecture today, and I don't know why, because this isn't what I taught them, they just went right to here and put it in the cells. Okay, that's not what it says to do. So you're to run it first. So with all this stuff in there, first you have to click solve. Okay, when you click solve, it will then give you the option to keep the solver solution. Yes, I do want to keep it. Return to the solver parameters dialog box and click OK. If you wanted to save the scenario, you could do a report and stuff too. We're not doing it. This do exactly what I'm doing here. Click OK. And now it doesn't appear that anything's really happened because it's saved this solver solution in the background. And if I were to just click close and then go back to solver, this model would still be there. But they do want you to load it into these cells. The thing is, if you don't click solve first and then tell it to keep the solution and go back to the dialog box when you're done, when you go to do this, you still won't get the points for it because you're supposed to solve it first. Then you go here, and then in this box, you highlight not just A14, but A14 down to 21. I found Sam to be a bit sensitive on that. And you don't click load. You do not click load. You click save. Even if those numbers are exactly the same as what you see in the figures in the bottom of the instructions, if you didn't solve it first, you will get it. And you can go back and pull the solver up and go through that process correctly if you get it wrong when you're marked by Sam. So what I mean by that is now I can close. I'm done. I've done this correctly. But let's say in the process of doing that, before you put the stuff in here, you forgot to actually solve it. You can just sit in a cell and go back to the solver and go do it all over again. So I'm going to hit solve. And if you have one of these incorrect and you find that that's why you got the thing wrong, you can go to the one you have incorrect and change it and fix the equality signs and click OK. And then go and resolve. Once you know you have everything correct, you go solve. And when you go solve, you return to the solver parameters dialog box, which I didn't have to check this time because I just did it. And you keep the solver solution and you click OK. And then you go load save. And then I'm going to go right over what I have in there. It doesn't really matter. And then you hit save, not load. If you hit load, what you end up doing is erasing the whole solver. And I'm not sure why. That's just the way Excel does it. Because loading it into itself then assumes you want to make a new solver. So what it does is it puts the answers in and erases the solver. So you never want to hit load, especially not when you're being graded by Sam. And then when you're done, you hit close. So you can go back and do it again, and it will overwrite what was there. because this is just the result of the solver model. And you can see this is pretty complicated stuff that's going on here, and you don't have to worry about it because solver did it for you. If you look at the formula bar and look at what's in these cells. So save your file. You just successfully completed the solver model. You have to do one similar to that on the test, and that might be the last time you do it. I just want everybody in a course like this to at least be aware that Excel can handle statistical math that heavy. It's pretty cool. Now, we got some easy stuff at the end here. We're going to switch to the all types worksheet. So this is just some review of pivot tables and pivot charts, but based on the fact we learned scenarios today, because what I didn't show you yet is that when you have scenarios in a worksheet, which this worksheet already has scenarios set up, if I were to go to the data tab, I'm already there, and I go to the scenario manager, whatever worksheets have scenarios, you'll see the different scenarios on the different sheets. And there's 3 sets of scenarios here. And here I think they did kind of do what I had mentioned should be a best practice, which is to save the original scenario and then have it, well, although it's still not, this still isn't a scenario that matches what's in the worksheet. And that's why I like the summary report, because the summary report, if you have scenarios made and then you have something else in these cells, this step here, all it's asking you to do is go to What If Analysis, go to Scenario Manager, click Summary. It'll default to Summary Report, Scenario Summary. And these cells are automatically the ones it's doing. You click OK, and it makes a separate worksheet that generates a full report that shows the current values plus the 3 scenarios. It's pretty cool. And this makes you look like you just went and did all this work and you really didn't have to do anything. You just generated the report. And that will appear just to the left of all types, and it does not say to move it or rename it or do anything with it. So that's it for step 13, literally. In addition to making these reports, these summary reports, you can also, using the same path, the same method, go in there, go to Scenario Manager, tell it you want to make a summary, and choose to do a pivot table report instead. And that is the next step, and we're going to click OK. And that goes just to the left of the sheet again. So if you don't do those in the right order, you have to make sure you have them in the right place, because you know how SAM is when it can't find a worksheet where it should be. And you don't mess with the worksheet tabs again. And now we have a pivot table like we learned how to play around with in week 8. So in week 8, we were working with tables, and we also worked with some pivot table stuff. And actually, that was week 9. That was the monster case, week 9, where we did all those nested functions. And then we started dealing with pivot tables following our work with tables, our extensive work with tables in week 8. So that we're now revisiting. And right away, I'm noticing that I'm clicking around and I'm sitting in this table, and that neat little thing doesn't come up on the side that shows me where everything has been placed in the table and how it's been set up. And when you create a pivot table from scratch, that will typically come up automatically because it's prompting you to move the data into where you want it in the pivot table. So again, this is review from week 9. We're not doing much different that we didn't do in week 9 already. We're just practicing it more. What did I show you that you need to do if you have a pivot table and for some reason you lose your stuff? Click anywhere in the pivot table and you get your 2 tabs. And if you go to the Analyze tab, you'll see the field list option is turned off. So if I turn it back on, I have all that stuff here. And this allows you to edit and play with the table a lot more easily than if you weren't using the field list button. So first thing you're going to do is get rid of the filters. So get rid of any data that's filtered. So just drag it back into the data section, and the filter is now gone. See, it's disappeared. Then week 7, back to here. Change the number format for each of the fields. Now, I know my screen's kind of squashed down there, but there's only 3 fields in here. There's 3 sets of data. Now, remember in week 9, I know this was a couple weeks ago, but there's a better, the best, you can highlight the numbers and change the format on the Home tab, but that doesn't change the actual data in the table. You need to click on each of the sets of data, go to Value Field Settings, go to number format, go to, what are we doing, currency? Currency with 2 decimals. Okay, go to, and now I've got these flipped here. Cancel that. Go to number format, currency, 2 decimals. Click OK. Then click OK again. Same thing 2 more times with each of the 3 fields. Number format, currency, 2 decimals. Click OK. Click OK again. Same thing again. Field settings, number format, currency, 2 decimals. Click OK again. Click OK again. Now that's properly formatted through the field settings. Now, the next step, which is to change the headers here in each of those fields to management, change, and process. Those 3 words. You can do that in here as well. However, you can also do that directly into the cell, and either way will be marked correct. Sam won't know the difference. The advantage of using the value field settings is it auto-fits your column when you type it into there, whereas if you type it directly into the cell, it leaves the column at the same width. However, if you go down to a further step, this is my comment on reading ahead of instructions, the last part of step 13 is to resize the columns A to D, so it doesn't really matter anyway that it's resizing the column for you because it's going to have to be set to 15, so just type it in. So the last one, process, enter. Then it wants you to add a title in cell A1. And I can see going to the next part of this step, you're going to format it right away. So you don't even have to worry about the formatting. Just paste it directly in there. And as soon as you paste it in there, make sure you don't have extra spaces in there. You don't. Go to Home tab. Cell styles. Styles. Yeah, I have the wide monitor. I have the full style thing up here. And under cell styles, you're going to choose the title style right there. So that's going back to week 2. This is like we're just typing at this point. Yes, we're dealing with the pivot table that we just learned in week 9, and we're sort of reviewing some of the same stuff we learned in week 9, but the last couple steps I did were weeks 1 and 2 stuff, literally. Cell styles and entering text into a cell. Finally, that was parts E and F. Finally, we're going to resize columns A to D to fit. So highlight the letter A all the way over to D, get all 4 columns highlighted. You can go to Format Column Width right here, or you can right-click Column Width and simply type in 15, hit Enter, and now all the columns are consistent, and that is it for the table itself. Save your file. And finally, they're going to have you add a pivot chart, which is as easy as clicking in a pivot table, going to Analyze, and clicking on the Pivot Chart button from that tab. And lucky for us, they knew exactly what chart we wanted, which was clustered column, and that the same thing should happen for you. Click OK. What happens whenever we make an object in a SAM case? We need to drag and position left corner and lower right corner, upper left, lower right every time, A8 to D20. So this one, for a change, we're actually coming in on size. We're getting it a little smaller. Just like the other 2 objects we've done in this case, the chart objects do not be touching the grid lines, and you will get it marked correct. Finally, and Mac users can simply skip this step. They don't even have to do it, and it will not hurt your mark. The Fields Buttons option is not available in Excel 2019, but it is for Mac, but it is on a PC, and you should still do this step if you're on a PC. See how busy this is with all these buttons showing? Remember how I showed you how to turn this back on if you lose it? You go in here and turn it on. That's the same place where if you're sitting in the chart, you go to the Analyze tab and you turn all those buttons off by going to Hide All. There you go. And now you can scroll down and take note that your stuff all looks pretty darn close to what you should see here. Except for the fact, as I mentioned, that they like to size their charts up right along the grid lines there, nice and symmetrical and aligned, but they will mark you wrong if you do that with your file. Sometimes I wonder if the authors of these cases actually put them in for grading, because the SAM system itself that grades does have its little quirks. But you've known about those since week 1. I'm always showing you guys how to get 100%. Speaking of which, let's save that file one more time and close it and submit it. All right, here we go, the moment of truth. Let's go for the summary report. Oh, it's loading solver. I can see it's loading solver now. That it's an add-in. Doesn't seem to add any, but yeah, there you go, 100%. And this was a video for a change. You might notice once in a while I do have some edits in the video where I stop and start and I made a mistake and I got through that one now. That was 100%. Bang on first take. That doesn't always happen. So, and we did spend a little more time on it. I think this video is going to be approaching the length of the week 9 video, but I don't think it's as complicated, and I think it demonstrates more than a lot of the other cases we've done the power of Excel and how good it can do in terms of getting your numbers in the right place and taking care of your money. And that's a good thing. On that note, I will see you next week.